Hello, everyone, and happy World Penguin Day. Today, I am thrilled to introduce you to our 2024 Scientist Spotlight, Dr. Rachel Hickcox. Dr. Rachel is a spatial ecologist and conservation biologist specializing in marine movement tracking and species distribution modeling. For her PhD at the University of Otago in New Zealand, Rachel used animal-borne GPS and dive loggers to track endangered yellow-eyed penguins at sea to understand their marine distribution, habitat use, and overlap with prey, commercial fisheries, and marine protected areas. Her research uses spatial and GIS methods to quantify these threats facing penguins, with the overall aim of informing marine spatial planning and conservation management decisions. Rachel is now the research scientist for the Helps Pōhatu Conservation Trust, where she manages the long-term monitoring and research program at Pōhatu, Flea Bay, one of the largest little penguin colonies on mainland New Zealand. She also works as a spatial ecologist at Proteus, a statistical consulting company based in Dunedin, New Zealand. Before her studies on New Zealand penguins, Rachel was an African penguin intern at Mystic Aquarium, and her first fieldwork experience was on Bird Island, South Africa, where she assisted a PhD student on her study of African penguin foraging ecology. She completed her master's degree at the University of Lincoln in the UK and undergraduate at Worcester Polytechnic Institute in the US. Welcome, Rachel, and congratulations. We're so excited to have you.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, so Rachel, you are in New Zealand right now working with Helps Pōhatu Conservation Trust as their research scientist. Can you share a bit of background with everyone about how you got into this career path?
Yeah, sure. So it all kind of began when I was a student. I was in 5th grade and we had to do a project. In that project, you could become an expert in anything. And I was sitting in the library, flipping through the P encyclopedia and came across penguins. And the rest is kind of history. So yep, they were my favorite animal for a very, very long time. And I was able to do my undergraduate, and then I was lucky enough to go and do a penguin master's in the UK, which kind of opened up my world to the possibilities of penguin research. And then, yeah, from there, I had a lot of very fortunate encounters with researchers, and I was able to, yeah, like you said, go to South Africa, work with Mystic Aquarium penguins. And then I really knew that I wanted to continue researching after I kind of had a couple of breaks in between my studies, and I knew that I really missed the research side of things. So I was able to get a PhD position at Otago, where I studied the yellow-eyed penguin. And from there, working with an endangered species like the yellow-eyed penguin, really highlighted, the important conservation needs in New Zealand for penguins in general. And I met the Helps Pōhatu Conservation Trust crew very early on in kind of the process of developing the trust. And there were so many different possibilities for research at the colony that hadn't been done in many, many years. So talking with them and developing our plan. So I was able to join their team after I completed my PhD.
That's awesome. I just love these stories of how, you get started with one species and then somehow along the way, you just kind of fall into these other species. And it's just like, it's all penguins and penguin people. We all just are so happy to connect to each other and just share like very similar experiences. So I love how you had kind of both like experience in the field, in university, and then also in zoos and aquariums. Being from the United States, where you can only view penguins in zoos and aquarium settings, what has it been like living in a country where penguins are in your own backyard?
It's really, really quite special, and something that I never really imagined would happen. I first fell in love with penguins in the US, just seeing them, in zoos and aquariums. That's where I first, found out how amazing they are. So coming here and being able to work with them, almost daily, is very, very special. And people in New Zealand have a real connection to the wildlife and their land, and to be part of that is very special. And they definitely wield their way into your hearts over time. And it's been even more exciting being able to work with multiple species. So it's not just a single species in New Zealand that I'm working with, or that I have worked with. So that shows me, how different, community groups and organizations, working to conserve their penguins, and how they are connected to that wildlife, and all under kind of that common goal of making sure that they, persist for forever.
Yeah. For those that aren't familiar, how many species of penguins are in New Zealand?
Sure. So on the mainland, there are three penguin species. So there's the yellow-eyed penguin, or hoiho, the little penguin, or korora, and the tawaki, which is a fiordland-crested penguin. And then we have three other species that are vagrants or pop up from time to time, or that live on the subantarctic islands. So we have two or more than two subantarctic islands, and we have several breeding colonies of other penguin species there as well.
It's so awesome that there are just so many penguins in New Zealand, and people don't, a lot of people I've met in the United States don't even realize how many penguins do live there. Little penguins, we know, are pretty common, right? Are they as common as, say, like seeing squirrels in the US, or not as common as that?
Definitely not like seeing squirrels. Korora, while their populations are bigger, they're actually pretty hard to see, because they're either in burrows during the day on land, or they're foraging at sea. So it's still quite rare to see them, and a lot of times you'll have to go to some sort of tour or viewing to see them, because they come home after dark and they leave before it gets light out. So they are pretty cryptic for an animal. And even though, they have large populations, it's definitely nowhere near what we think of, as like massive populations. And unlike a lot of Antarctic species, which people think about, they don't really nest in massive colonies either. Our colony at Pōhatu is about 229 breeding pairs, roughly. And that's one of the largest, and that's pretty rare, and it's spread over quite a large area. And you don't just like walk around and see them hanging out. They're always in burrows, or, underground, or in nest boxes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I know so many people, you might think of even like African penguins just being all along a beach. These New Zealand penguins, and even the ones you mentioned, all have very, very different habitats where they are at. Can you share a little bit about your experience with the yellow-eyed penguin? I know you did a lot of background work with them as well.
Yeah, sure. So my work was, there's been kind of a long-term research and monitoring program on the yellow-eyed penguin too, and because there are an endangered species, there's a recovery strategy. So there's many different groups and organizations who work together to conserve hoiho. So I joined to do my PhD research, and again, they're very unique penguin, actually. They sometimes are classified as antisocial, but I like to say they're just social. So they do, socialize with each other, but they like to nest quite far away from each other, not really seeing other penguins. They nest in pretty tough terrain, in terms of it's a lot of forest, or rocky cliffs. I'm trying to find that vegetation outcrops on those cliffs. So it can be quite a diverse kind of environment that they can live in. So working with them and going into these pretty amazing, semi-remote parts of New Zealand was pretty cool. And yeah, just being able to see how they kind of adapted to that environment pretty well.
Yeah.
My work was putting GPS trackers on them to see where they're going out to sea.
All right, let's talk about GPS trackers. What are GPS trackers, dive loggers? I know you use GIS. What are these tools? And then how do those tools help the penguins?
Sure. So GPS trackers are a type of biologging tool, which means we put gear or devices on animals, So then they can go and collect data for us and give us information on kind of their spatial ecology, so where they are in space and time, so where they're distributing, particularly for animals who move significantly, like penguins do. So we use different types of loggers to record this information. And one of them is a GPS logger, and those are what we consider archival, which means all the data is stored on those GPS devices. And so we have to get the devices back in order to get the data and find out where they're going. But those loggers also a lot of times have a depth recorder, a time and depth, an accelerometer. So it takes additional information on how deep the animal is diving, or oppositely, how they're flying, how high they're flying, if they're flying birds. And then accelerometer, so it gives you information on how they're moving kind of in space. So you can get information about prey captures and things like that. And so there's, other types of loggers that you don't have to get back. So those are more like satellite tags, where you can put them on and the information is transmitted to you. And all of those there's a lot of different varieties. And so choosing those all depends on your species and what technology you're familiar with and what will get you the best quality information for what you need. And then all of that kind of goes into many, many types of analyses that you can do, looking at just basically where the animal is in space. So looking at habitat selection and where they're choosing to search for food, or where they're nesting, etc. Or you can look at the dive information, and you can look at dive behavior. So how deep are they diving? How frequently are they diving? What does their foraging trip look like? Or a combination of the two. And so getting that information, being able to conserve a species, really fundamental questions to even starting that is finding out where they live and why they live there. And so these devices are really great at pinpointing and being able to use certain types of spatial analysis to determine and answer those questions so that we can figure out, well, where do we need to conserve them for the future?
Right. And I know you've done research too, like comparing this with fishing industries, because we know the penguins have to travel to get their fish. Has there been a lot of research that you've found about that distance being traveled? And how does that compare to historical data? Is there even historical data on this, or is this kind of newer research?
There is some historical data, but not very much in New Zealand at all. There are, some past studies, but it's all kind of with, better recording of fishing information, commercial fishing locations of vessels and fishing effort and things like that. It's getting a little bit more of a popular research topic, I guess. Also because, the fishing industry, it's such a massive uh, industry as a whole. And so for the, not for the first time, but it's every year it grows basically. So there's even more of a need to determine kind of how, any or all marine animals are interacting with those vessels. So for New Zealand, my study was the first of its kind really for yellow-eyed penguins in New Zealand. And we're hoping to kind of repeat that for little penguins, because they do live in, their range does overlap slightly, but not enough. So we need to kind of look at, them as two separate species and look at the overlap, particularly for little penguins. So yeah, getting an idea of kind of a lot of this is kind of like baseline, so we don't really have a lot to compare it to. But the hopes is that over, the next decade, 2 decades, we can compare and see, is there more overlap? Is there less overlap? Is there change in where the, penguins are foraging versus where the, commercial fishing boats are fishing? So yeah, getting all of that kind of new information is pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so important, but also like fascinating that, you get to look at so many different aspects of the environment and the other factors at play here and how that's impacting like the penguins' livelihood and their ability to eat. Can you share also a little bit about Flea Bay and kind of just the area that you're working in right now? What does that look like? Is there fishing in that area, or is that kind of a preserved area?
Sure. So Flea Bay, which is also known as Pōhatu, is on Banks Peninsula, which is on the South Island of New Zealand. It's on the southeast coast of the South Island. So part of it's a peninsula that juts out into the water, and there's kind of a convergence of a couple of currents, and the bay is kind of on the outer edge of the peninsula, and it's made Banks Peninsula is made up of many, many, many different and small bays. And Pōhatu is actually a very unique location because it was one of the first marine reserves on the South Island, and it was established in 1999. And so that reserve was put into place, due to many, a lot of work from many, many individuals, including the landowners, Shireen and Francis Helps. So they were able to get that put into place. So in the bay, it's a no-take reserve. So nothing can come in and nothing can come out of that environment, which is pretty great for the penguins and for all of the marine wildlife that live there.
Yeah.
The only downside is that the penguins don't actually, they don't forage very often in that. It's more of a place where they come right before they're coming on land. So they'll raft in small groups on the water until they're ready to come to land. So they're not actually actively foraging very much within the reserve. So a lot of times they're going out, 10, even up to like 20 kilometers offshore.
Oh, wow.
And around Banks Peninsula, there's a marine mammal sanctuary, which extends again into kind of part of their foraging area, but not completely. And that sanctuary doesn't completely restrict any commercial fishing, really. So there are some voluntary set net and trawling bans, and there's no set netting within 4 nautical miles of shore, but it doesn't cover the entire area where little penguins are foraging. So there's definitely areas where they remain unprotected, and there's a very high likelihood that they are interacting with trawl and set net fishery vessels.
So when you say interacting with, do you mean becoming bycatch of those vessels?
Yeah, so interaction could mean a lot of things. So we don't, not all encountered. I guess encounter would probably be better. So any encounter with a vessel doesn't always mean bycatch. There's a lot of possibility that they don't get caught as bycatch, but it could, that's the worst case scenario, is that they're caught as bycatch.
Thanks for clearing that up for everybody listening. We all want to know, what has been the biggest challenge when it comes to your penguin research?
That's a very good question. I guess I have two, I guess. So for my PhD research with Hoiho, the field work was very challenging in terms of not only choosing the sites where you wanted to go and track penguins, but there aren't very many of them. So having to find and identify individuals that you were confident would return to that breeding area, that was the right age, the right weight, had the right age chicks, or we're in the right stage the time that we were tracking. So all of that kind of logistical things were kind of one of the more challenging parts, but at the same time it was one of the most exciting and one of the most rewarding parts. So give or take. And then with the little penguin research, it's actually kind of a little bit been the opposite. We have such a large colony that, coming from that background of working with so few individuals, now I have a colony of quite a number more individuals, and being able to identify those penguins that I want to track, which ones are the key individuals that we want to get information from. Then that's kind of been challenging as well. And then there's all of the other side, or just as important, but we had kind of a starvation event last year with little penguins. So we had kind of quite a big, we had to respond to that. And, you know, so all of those things are always challenging and unexpected.
Yeah, yeah, that's the nature of science. That's the nature of
Yes.
science. I love how you have experienced both sides of the spectrum, though, with like, where's my penguin? And then now now where you're at, you have nest boxes where it's like, oh, here they are.
Yep.
Open the lid and there they are. What would you say has been like the most rewarding part of being a penguin scientist?
Again, there's a couple of answers. So one of my kind of favorite things is, you know, getting the data back and looking at it for the very first time. It's always just a very exciting moment to figure out, you know, where those birds have been foraging while you've been, you know, here on land waiting for them to come back. So that's always, you know, very exciting. And more times than not, I'm you know, looking at the data and it's surprising me in some way. So they're always, you know, I can always make assumptions and think, oh, you know, maybe that's what they're going to do. And then they always do something different. So that's been kind of, you know, always very exciting and pretty cool. And just, you know, getting to work with the animals themselves. Not a lot of people can say that they've, you know, handled and worked with yellow-eyed penguins or little penguins, and being able to, yeah, have that privilege to see their different personalities and you know, how well adapted they are for the life that they live.
Yeah, yeah. I have to ask, do you have a favorite penguin species?
It's a good question. Not really. I've worked with, you know, different ones, and they're just, you know, it's like comparing apples to oranges. They're just so different. They all have their own, you know, quirks and yeah. So it's really, I can't really pick one.
I struggle with that as well. I love them all, but
Yeah.
now's a good time to make the announcement that this year, 2024, is the year of the little penguin. So we are going to be celebrating little penguins all year long here at Penguins International. So of course, this ties in really well with your work, Rachel. So let's talk little penguins, Eudyptula minor, for a moment. I've heard multiple names for these birds: little blue, just little, just blue, white flippered penguins, corora, fairy penguins. Are they all the same thing? Help answer that question.
I could probably be here for like an hour trying to answer that question. It's quite a complicated one. Overall, the taxonomy of little penguins is a bit debated, so it's not completely resolved at the moment. So the official, you know, species name is the little penguin, and that is Eudyptula minor, and it includes the Australian and the New Zealand little penguins. There's been genetic research in the past decade to indicate that there's actually two kind of clades, so genetically distinct clades of little penguins. So there's the Australian clade, which is if they're found in Australia and in Otago Peninsula, so in a small part of New Zealand. And those are often are called the fairy penguin, sometimes just blue penguin. And then the New Zealand clade of little penguins, obviously, is all throughout the rest of New Zealand. And then there's historically in the past in New Zealand, the New Zealand clade has been split into further subspecies. We no longer really recognize any official subspecies of the little penguin, but white flippered was one of them. And they are a little bit more distinct than some of those other subspecies were. So there's an argument there that they could be, you know, maybe not a subspecies, but something, you know, separate group upon themselves. But right now we consider them as a morph or a morphotype. So they look a little bit different. They have some slightly different behaviors. So little penguins are kind of a dark blue color, which is where they get the name blue penguin. They're about 1 kilogram and about 32 centimeters, which I'm very bad at converting back into.
Once you've learned it one way, that's just
yeah, exactly. But they are the smallest penguin in the world. And the white flippered, the little penguin, the blue morph we call it, has one kind of white stripe on the leading edge of their flipper. Whereas the white flippered penguin, they're a much lighter blue color. And it's thought that has to do with an adaptation to the watercolor around Banks Peninsula, and just the environment that they live in. And so they're have kind of two stripes. So they have a lot more white on their flipper, which is where they get the white flippered name. They're on average a little bit larger. And they have some breeding differences. So the blue penguin, the Australian blue penguin, very often will have 2 clutches in a season, or sometimes more than that. So they'll lay twice. So they're able to raise up to 4 chicks. Whereas the white flippered penguin and the New Zealand penguin in general, we see that they only kind of really lay 1 clutch every year. So small differences like that, and with some genetic work, hopefully in the next kind of couple years, we'll be able to have kind of a better idea of exactly how many species or subspecies they are. But yeah.
I just appreciate you so much for answering that one, because it's like you really can get into it. I know penguin people, we all have our ideas on everything. So it's great to know that little penguin is the correct terminology people can use for now. More to come.
Exactly.
Do you have a favorite like field story or penguin story that you're like, man, this is super memorable, that you can share?
Yes, I do. I have very many, so it's hard to pick one. I guess I'll give you 2, I guess. One with the hoi ho. So we were working at a field site in the Catlins, and the weather wasn't great. It was pretty overcast, sprinkling a little bit. So we were out there kind of late in the day, and we were going to retrieve some GPSs from a penguin. So we were, our typical routine was getting down there, looking around at the nest site to see if the penguin was there. And then we would kind of hole up in an area where they couldn't see us. So we would hide from them in a bush somewhere and just wait until we either heard them or we saw them in the binoculars. And so eventually our penguin hopped up on land, and the way that we were positioned, it was a little bit hard to tell if it had a GPS or not. But we got a quick look and it looked, like it had something on its back. So we jumped down, and were able to catch it. We kind of surround it, and then jump on it for lack of a better description.
Little Irwin
and we were able
moment.
to get it, and yeah, exactly. And when we looked at him to get the GPS off, we realized that, so it had, at that time, it also had a camera. So it had a GPS and a camera. The camera was no longer there, so we lost the camera.
Oh no.
Yep, but and that's not uncommon. But the GPS was still there. But then we looked at it a bit more closely, and it was hanging on by a tentacle squid, a tentacle of a squid.
What?
So the tape had come off completely, and it was just hanging on to his feathers with a very sticky tentacle squid. I couldn't believe that this device
I can't even imagine.
Yeah, it was, we were stunned. I had to look at it multiple times and be like, is this real? So while we lost the camera, we got the GPS, so that was, a win, really.
Some of the funding returned, the technology. Oh my gosh, thank you, little squid tentacle, for
thank goodness they really wanted to eat that squid that day.
Yeah, wow, that is absolutely wild.
Yeah,
I love those kinds of stories.
Yeah, it was great. And then with little penguins, I guess I don't, there's a lot of different, encounters that we had over that I've had. But just one of the really special kind of and more memorable times that I get to spend with penguins is at night. So most of the time, the landowners and the tour groups are all out by, dark. So we let the penguins have their penguin time on the beach. So we don't interact with them when it gets dark out. But because I need to get those GPS devices back, and when they're only coming back for the couple of hours every night during the dark, I have to be out there at night. So it's such a massive difference coming from working with Hoiho, with yellow-eyed penguins. You're just walking around the colony and there's just penguins everywhere. You can hear them, you can see them. A lot of times they will go into the nest and interact with either their partner or their chicks, but then they'll come out and they'll just sit right in front of the doorway all night long, just, preening and sleeping. And, yeah, it's so just being able to walk through the colony at that time, it's like you're, hopping over, little penguin rocks in the in the path, and just listening and hearing them. So yeah, it's kind of, a little bit more, abstract, but it's one of my favorite times in the colony.
And anyone that has traveled to see little penguins has probably had that moment of just like awe, because it's nighttime and like here they are. They're little like party animals at night. They're just coming up to shore and living their life, and it's just there's just something about it that's like mesmerizing to watch, and we're just so lucky to share the world with them, aren't we?
We really are. Yep, yeah. They're very special.
So we're going to kind of talk a little bit about where you're working right now, Helps Pōhatu Conservation Trust. What is something that you wish people understood about it or about your projects?
Sure. I'll give you just a little bit of background, I guess, on how the Helps Pōhatu Conservation Trust started. So like I've mentioned before, Shireen and Francis Helps bought the farm over 40 years ago now. And one of the very first things they did after they realized that they had penguins living on the farm was start predator trapping. So in New Zealand, we have introduced introduced mammals, feral cats, stoats, ferrets, so the mustelid groups, rabbits, hedgehogs, rats, possums. So all of these as well as dogs, will prey on ground dwelling animals, including the little penguin. So one of the first conservation measures was to predator trap, which is kind of a weird concept for a lot of people outside of New Zealand, as you're killing things basically to save the much more rare and valuable things that are meant to be there, whereas those predators are not meant to be there in the first place. So after they kind of started doing that, they were able to get that marine reserve established, and they closed kind of the farm to public access. And instead of, saying, okay, no one is allowed on the land at all, they decided, well, no, we want to share the penguins, with everyone, but we want to do it in a controlled way that help the penguins and not harm them. So they started an eco tour company where people could come out. You hop in a van, come out to the bay, and you can see the penguins and the other wildlife at Pōhatu. And through that, they were able to establish kind of this kind of conservation and monitoring program that started kind of, I guess, even in the 90s, they had been doing some research out in the colony. And so over the years, they did a couple of breeding studies. And then they had, flipper banded some penguins, in the mid 2000s, and, got some really great information about the colony to begin with. And then, everything was going on, and I met them in 2019, and we got started. We started talking about all the possibilities, basically, that we needed to, and all the questions we needed to answer at the colony. And then COVID hit, of course. So COVID did play a very important role in kind of the trust and its formation, because we were an eco-tour company. We needed to kind of, or we were able to kind of change gear a little bit and say, okay, well, if tourism, doesn't come back to quite what we want it to, we have the ability now to be able to put or do more conservation and research in the colony. So the trust was formed And it took a couple of years for us to get permits and funding in order to kind of start the project. So I worked with them very closely to kind of get all of the, regulatory things and put into place so that we could do some more hands-on monitoring. So all in the past, the monitoring has been kind of more opportunistically and kind of with the tours and a little bit less frequently, and it was always observational, so there was never any penguin handling or anything like that. So yeah, then I started officially in 2022, which was our first season. Yep, so that was pretty exciting to kind of see all of that hard work that we put in since the formation of the trust in 2020 come to fruition finally in the colony. And that's kind of when we started that more long, the extension of the long-term project, where now we are monitoring about 230 nest boxes every week. And we're marking penguins with transponders to identify each bird, to know who they are, putting GPSs on. So yeah, we have tons of many projects that are ongoing currently at the colony.
That is so awesome. I just love how, there are so many stories that came out of the pandemic, and I think all of us had very different situations, but what a wonderful way to take that kind of negative and think about, okay, what can we actually do to help the penguins here
exactly
and do more? And so, yeah, what a great use of time and obviously talent to get that up and running. Yeah, I'm really excited to continue to hear more about how this long-term research goes, especially because I know it's been taking some time to set up, but it will be interesting because now you will have that baseline data to reference. Of course, this next question is one that you can kind of answer two different ways, but it's what actions can the general public take to help penguins? I know you can answer this from the local New Zealand perspective, and then also a global perspective. So you can kind of answer it how you think is best.
Cool. One of the really awesome things that I've seen while working with, a smaller community group and trust, they're so dedicated to doing everything to protect the species. And one of the main things is, all of these really small actions really add up over time and make a massive difference. So, while you think recycling or, picking up trash on the beach, won't have an overall impact, it actually does. Because if you and then, 100 other people also do that, it all adds up over time. So, like I said, very small, things for people internationally, continuing to recycling, using less, single-use plastic, eating sustainable seafood. So choosing exactly which seafood you're supporting, being able to say no to things, going to the grocery store and saying, no, actually, I don't want a bag, or I don't want, a straw, or I don't want, all of that, the more that people say those things, the more businesses and consumers will be like, oh, actually, maybe we don't need to supply these things if people don't want them. So it all has that kind of overall, global look. Even going to your local zoo and aquarium, that's a massive help, because a lot of zoos and aquariums in the United States all support the research and monitoring of the species that they have in care. So, I know at Mystic Aquarium, for example, they help Sand Cob, which is the rehab facility for the African penguin, and they support them. So all of that money that you go and enjoy your day at the zoo and aquarium, a lot of that money goes right back into not only caring for the animals that they have, but caring for the animals here where they're naturally found. And then of course donations are always hugely helpful. All of the tour money from Pōhatu goes directly right back into conservation, into making new nest boxes, predator control, cleaning up their habitat, buying GPS devices, supporting the research that we do. So all of the money that gets donated goes right back into the conservation. We also, a little plug here, we have an adoptive penguin program where you can adopt a nest box and you can get updates. You get a photo of your nest box and you get to name it. So you get to pick a name. That name is on there for a whole year, and then you can get updates on your penguins and what's going on in your nest box. So it's a bit more of a, you can see exactly what's going on and where your money's going. So, all of that goes and helps us immensely. And we couldn't really do it, any of our work without the public support. And then, other things going in, as you're walking along the beach, picking up all the trash you find, picking all the trash you find up on the side of the road. Telling people about penguins is, or other species from around the world that are, endangered or threatened, even that. So every little bit counts.
Absolutely. And, we've just come off of our massive March of the Penguin Madness competition where we had zoos and aquariums with their penguins competing for the top spot. And we did have a couple little penguins from some facilities in the United States and one from Australia. So it was also an opportunity for all these different groups to share about their penguins and the species that they have. And then, of course, we are also, gearing up the next holiday after World Penguin Day here today is World Ocean Day, which is June 8th. And so we host a pickup for penguins every year to get people to pick up and clean up their marine debris. And then we also do a penguin pedal as well to encourage people to ride their bikes to reduce CO2. So there's a lot of ways, if you're watching this today, that you can get involved, that you can take some action. And of course, we want to be able to support our friends over at Helps Pōhatu Conservation Trust this year. So we're really trying to get more awareness about the work that they do. And it's just really incredible. So Rachel, for the community, if they want to get in touch with you or follow your work, what's the best way that they can kind of stay in touch?
Sure. So for the trust and the work that we're doing out of the colony, head over to that website that was down at the bottom. We send out kind of quarterly updates and reports, so you can sign up for a newsletter. And it's a great summary of what's going on, gives you a lot of personal stories, and it gives you some information about the trust and what research we're doing. And then me personally, I do have a personal website, which you can go and check out if you're interested, and social media as well for the trust. Facebook and Instagram are all great. And then on through my website, I have all of my contact information, and the trust also has contact information. So if you have specific questions or anything, if you want to reach out personally, just give us a shout.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And congratulations again on being our 2024 Scientist Spotlight. Thank you all for joining us here today on World Penguin Day. We hope you learned something new, and we hope that you take this action and initiative to care for penguins. So thank you so much and have a good one. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.